Look at the pharmacy shelves and grocery stores today. Rows of tampons, soft cotton pads, silicone menstrual cups, and advanced pain medication. Every month, half the population of the world relies on this multi-billion-dollar toolkit just to get through the week. But for thousands of years of human history, absolutely none of these things existed. No plastic, no sterile cotton, not even a steady stream of hot water. So how did a medieval woman actually deal with her period? Did they just bleed openly everywhere they walked? Did they simply wear layers upon layers of heavy wool clothes to hide it? Or is the history of how our ancestors managed pain and blood hiding a much more resourceful story? Think of a medieval period not just as a biological event, but like navigating a hazardous chemical spill in the middle of a crowded village square. Modern science treats menstruation as a normal biological cycle, but medieval society treated a bleeding woman like an open secret. So the real challenge wasn't just managing the physical blood, it was also hiding it. But the story isn't as simple. First, we need to separate the modern biological reality from the medieval one. You see, the frequency of a modern period is not the same as a medieval period. Today, an average woman might experience around 300 to 400 periods in her lifetime. Back then, that number was drastically lower. If a modern menstrual cycle is like a predictable monthly calendar alert, a medieval woman's cycle was more like a faulty, flickering faucet that only ran a few times a year. The mechanism controlling this faucet was a direct calculation of body fat and physical stress. For a peasant woman, puberty didn't hit at age 11 or 12 like it often does today. The severe lack of fats and nutrients delayed the onset of menstruation until approximately 14 or 15 years of age. We see this written clearly in the textbooks of the time. In 12th century Italy, a famous set of women's medical guides emerged from the Salerno school, collectively known as the Trotula. Copies of these texts flooded medieval Europe, and when scholars looked at the manuscripts preserved in Oxford, they found the exact same standard. A girl's first bleeding was expected at age 14, but ink on a parchment page didn't always match the brutal reality of everyday life. Modern scientists recently analyzed nearly 1,000 adolescent skeletons buried in medieval England. What they discovered was a massive gap between medical theory and physical survival. For most everyday girls, menstruation didn't come until the age of 15. And if you were a girl trying to survive the dense, polluted, and nutrient-starved streets of medieval London, your body was under so much stress that you wouldn't start bleeding until age 17. And once that faucet finally turned on, it was constantly being shut off by the brutal demands of survival and societal expectations. Due to early marriage, often occurring before or as soon as a girl started bleeding, a woman's body was locked in a near-continuous loop of pregnancy and lactation from the age of 15 to 40. Surviving pregnancy meant the faucet was off for 9 months. Giving birth triggered breastfeeding, often lasting for 2 to 3 unbroken years to act as a natural, if unreliable, form of birth control. This prolonged lactation kept hormone levels suppressed, extending the biological drought. When you couple that with the seasonal exhaustion of heavy agricultural labor, plowing fields, hauling water, and reaping harvests, a medieval woman's body simply lacked the energy required to bleed. And when women did bleed, the amount of blood was significantly less. The management of this blood was not regulated or standardized. It was an exercise in pure mechanical filtration. Imagine running a makeshift water treatment setup using only what you could forage from the forest or scrape together from the laundry pile. Most women relied entirely on standard porous materials. To catch the fluid, a woman needed something that could trap liquid inside its fibers, stay securely in place without any adhesive, and block external moisture from leaking onto her outer gowns. If the materials were too coarse, they caused severe rashes over a 14-hour workday. If they were too thin, the liquid would break right through the boundary line. But the story isn't as simple as everyone grabbing the exact same cloth. The reality of how a woman handled this filtration depended completely on her social class and her financial access to textiles. This shows that period management was driven by economic survival, geography, and wealth at the same time. For example, a wealthy noblewoman or a merchant's wife had access to high-quality, finely woven linens. They would use washable cloth pads, often referred to as rags or clouts, which were folded into thick layers and pinned securely to an adjustable linen girdle tied around the waist. Because they owned multiple changes of clothing and had servants to boil the laundry, keeping this cloth pristine and sterile was relatively easy. But a poor peasant woman living in a rural village faced a completely different equation. Textiles were incredibly expensive, sometimes costing a month's wages for a single tunic, meaning she couldn't simply tear up perfectly good clothing for rags. Instead, poorer women had to make do with whatever scraps survived the household linen cycle, bleed freely into the clothes they were wearing, or look directly to nature for a solution. In marshy areas across Europe, women turned to wild sphagnum moss. This wasn't just a desperate backup plan. Sphagnum moss is a natural marvel. It can absorb up to 20 times its weight in liquid, and it contains natural antimicrobial properties that inhibit bacterial growth. Women would harvest the moss, dry it out, and pack it directly into small linen pouches or tuck it firmly into the crotch of their underchemise. It was free, highly effective, and entirely disposable. When that biological faucet did run, it often brought what medieval texts called painful congestion in the abdomen. Today, our first instinct is to reach for a targeted painkiller. But this is the part most people get wrong. We assume medieval women were left to suffer in silence due to religious shame. The real cause of their relief wasn't modern pharmaceuticals. It was a system of natural pharmacy and sympathetic magic, the belief that a plant's physical appearance revealed its medical purpose. To soothe intense cramping, women targeted plants with bright red branches, like hypericon. They didn't just drink these herbs. The mechanism was highly direct. They pounded the plant and laid it directly under their genitals for immediate topical absorption. But the story gets more intense when dealing with a heavy, dangerous bleeding that needed to be stopped. Some women took powdered comfrey root, mixed it into a goblet of wine, and drank it to quickly dry up the flow. If that failed, they took stinging nettle, crushed it into a soft paste, mixed it with honey to dull the sting, and smeared it onto raw wool to use as a medicated compress. Ironically, the people who were ashamed of these methods weren't our medieval ancestors. When 19th century Victorian scholars first translated these texts, they were so deeply embarrassed by the word menses that they hid the instructions by translating them into Latin and Greek. The medieval women themselves didn't hide behind dead languages. They just grabbed the honey, the wine, and the herbs and solved the problem. Managing a period became more than just a matter of everyday facts over time. It became a reflection of how a society treats its most vulnerable realities. But history never said that medieval women were passive victims of their era or that their bodies were flawed compared to ours. It only solved a neutral problem: how to survive and manage a completely normal biological cycle with the raw materials available from the earth. So how did a medieval woman actually deal with her period? The answer is that they didn't need our modern pharmacy shelves because their bodies, locked in a continuous loop of pregnancy, prolonged lactation, and intense labor, bled far less often than women do today. And when that biological faucet did run, they didn't suffer in silence. They adapted by engineered absorption using wild sphagnum moss, structured their management around their social class, and turned to a natural pharmacy of herbs and wine to master the pain. That's the whole story. A bleeding woman in medieval history isn't just a biological footnote or a taboo to be hidden away in ancient Latin translations. It's proof of an unbroken chain of human survival, adaptability, and shared ingenuity stretching across centuries. Every scrap of linen washed, every handful of moss gathered by a peasant, and every herbal recipe passed down through generations is its own survival story.